carry on.
Hi, and welcome to Life, Love, Insight, Fertility Experiences. I am here today with the one and only Hayley King, who I absolutely adore. Hayley is, I think, in my mind, infamous at this point. So Hayley, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to talk about parenting and donor conception and siblings.
Thank you, Laurie. Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. And yeah, thanks again for inviting me on to talk with you today. I'm really excited to, like I say, have a discussion about these really important topics.
So important. Yeah. Can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So people might be able to realize from my accent, I'm from the UK. So my name's Hayley King. I'm actually a donor conceived person. I was conceived quite a while ago now, in the early 80s, thanks to really early IVF treatment. My parents were one of the first to go through IVF treatment at Bourne Hall Clinic in the UK, which was the first ever IVF clinic. I came along, and it was a very celebrated story growing up. But sadly, what I wasn't told until a lot later in life is that as part of that early procedure, an anonymous sperm donor was used. So I was a donor conceived person and didn't know it for the majority of my life. But I suppose the twist came a few years after I found out I was donor conceived, because I wanted to start a family with my wife. And of course, we would need donor treatment in order to do that. So I became a parent to donor conceived twins in 2017, boy-girl twins. So I'm both donor conceived and a parent through donor conception. So I suppose that's a little summary of my story. And yeah, I kind of work in this area now. I have my website, allthingsdonorconception.com, but more recently help run the online support platform Paths to ParentHub. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what I'm all about. So yeah,
you make it sound so simple, but it's really not. Because
no.
Speaking engagement, she does legislative work, she does and she does Path to Parenthood. She is like really a powerhouse in the field, and really you made so many wonderful inroads. Not just in the UK, but I think throughout the world. So, I admire everything very much. So thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Laurie. And like I say, it amazes me, because we connected over the internet, didn't we, Laurie, like a few years ago now? And it's just, yeah, the power of social media and the internet has meant that I suppose all of this work can be done cross borders and cross oceans, isn't it? So yeah, it's great, like I say, to be speaking with you again today on your podcast. So
I know. It seems like so long ago, and it seems like yesterday, right? It was like right when you were. Yeah. So Hayley, you've put together this incredible course that I wanted to talk about today. And it's for I don't know the exact name, but it's really for parents
mm-hmm.
understand about donor siblings and the
Yeah.
significance of it. And so there's so much to understand. And maybe we should just start off with, if you want to tell somebody, what the most significant piece of having a child is that becomes a person through donor conception when it comes to siblings, what would you want them to know?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Laurie. And I think my response is probably seems quite a simple one, but actually, when you speak to parents or families that go through donor conception, I think the donor sibling piece, or the donor sibling topic, isn't really discussed before treatment. I think most people, understandably, regardless of how they've come to donor conception as a path for them, whether infertility or maybe in a LGBTQ plus relationship or going solo, I think the priority is obviously getting pregnant, having a baby, funding the treatment, all of these really important things. And we don't often think into the future, probably because we maybe worry that that might not happen. We might not actually have that longed for child, but also you don't know what you don't know, do you? So if this topic isn't brought up around donor siblings, sometimes those discussions only come up after the children are born. So, and when I say donor siblings, just to be a real basic level, I think it might be quite helpful to explain what a donor sibling is, because there might well be people here listening that don't know. I don't know if that would be helpful, Laurie.
I think
that
would be really helpful. I mean, I think it would, and I would like to just interject that people are supposed to be educated about the possibilities of donor siblings when they go for their intended parent consult, which is a consult that everybody's supposed to go through when they are using donor conception. So sometimes it gets overlooked, but we really don't want it to be. So yes, please go ahead and explain
Yeah, so at a very basic level, if you're using a donor, whether that's an egg donor or a sperm donor or indeed embryo donation, there is a likelihood that there will be other families that will use that same donor. So unless you've used a donor that's never donated or they've never had their own children, because obviously donor siblings could relate to the donor's children too, that the likelihood is that there will be other people, other families, other children out there in the world that do share genetics with your child that you've been able to conceive with a donor. And yeah, and that's just that on a very basic level. I think historically, like from when I was a young child, we didn't have things like commercial DNA testing. There wasn't the facility to connect with donor siblings like we have now. And we can talk about the methods of, that people can connect a bit later on in the chat. But I think now it's become a really important discussion to have right at the start of your journey, like you say, Laurie, hopefully through educational consults. And we have implications counselling here in the UK, which is a similar thing, because donor siblings can go on to impact our families later on in life. And it's something that, we should be really discussing with our children from a younger age, really. So yeah, there's lots of things to consider.
It's such a loaded piece, because like the parent has to be comfortable. And
Yeah.
what you said is so true when we started off, right? The focus when you're trying to conceive is on trying to conceive. It's not necessarily thinking about the child or thinking about this person, right? Who's going to grow up and be an adult, who's going to have curiosity about their genetic origin. And
Exactly.
there's so much involved in that, right? For the parent, there's the genetic grief that's involved. There's the concern that these people will take over as their quote unquote real family or close family, and they'll lose their role, that they will not want to have to connect, that they'll have to face the fact that they're using donor conception on a regular basis. So it's so loaded, so how do parents find like some form of comfort and security in helping their child understand their origin and understand their curiosity? I think
Yeah, I mean, and I think it is a really important point to raise, Laurie, which you've done there, is that there are so many fears around this topic, and they're really, as a parent, because obviously I'm a parent too, I've had those fears around the donor being replaced at some point, all that kind of stuff, or worrying, will I bond with my children because I don't share genetics with my children? I'm not sure if I clarified that actually at the start. So I don't, my wife carried the pregnancy and we used her egg, so I don't share genetics with my children. So there are a lot of fears there, but I do think the flip side is that at some stage, and it is a progression that we become comfortable as parents talking to our children, not only about their story, but also about some of these more nuanced topics, whether that be donor siblings, curiosity, like who the donor might be. And instead of maybe closing the door on those fears and kind of thinking and hoping they might go away, we maybe tackle them a little bit head on, and with support, obviously, because it's important, support and community. But actually, let's really try and tackle these subjects, because in order to best support our children, we need to be in the best place. We need to be able to support ourselves first, I think, put
so
ourselves
true.
first.
So true.
Yeah, so I think, yes, whilst these topics are really uncomfortable and scary and frightening, understandably, we do need to work through some of them, so that, yeah, should this come up, and it probably, some of those topics will come up as our children grow and become more curious, maybe. Certainly if you've got kids like mine who are quite curious, you're going to have questions and you want to be able to answer them as best you can and support your children.
Yeah. So, you just raised so many things, right? About being a parent of the donor conceived child, and helping them, or first helping yourself and becoming comfortable and seeking support in it, because there are so many feelings involved with it. And you went through them yourself, right? Because your initial feeling is, will the child bond with me? Will I bond with the child? Now, I mean, in my practice, I find people bond relatively quickly. I don't know what your experience was, but I find that it doesn't take that long for the bonding process to take place.
Yeah, it can vary. I mean, we work very closely. Like I say, I work for an organisation called ParentHub, which we can talk about a bit later. But we work quite closely with a perinatal psychologist there called Julianne Boutelev, and she often comments, which really resonates with me, is that bonding can happen straight away, but then sometimes it doesn't for lots of different reasons, and they're not all to do with donor conception. So even parents that maybe have had a child without donor conception may struggle with bonding, and that just happens sometimes. But what we find with parents through donor conception is that if they feel like they're not bonding with the child for whatever reason, they latch donor conception as the reason, latch onto that as a reason, which might not always be the case, if that makes sense. I mean, for me on a personal level, I did feel like I bonded quite well with our twins, but I think some of that was practically because we had two babies and there was two of us. My wife, we bottle fed, so obviously that the kind of division of labor, if you like, with feeding and all that, we could share. And I do think that if we'd have made, I do reflect sometimes, if we'd have had one baby and maybe my wife breastfed, I might have felt differently because there weren't certain tasks that I would have been able to do, like the feeding example, whereas with twins it was all hands to the deck, to be honest. So it's like we kind of, so I kind of had to have a level of bonding, but there's been certainly occasions as our children have grown where maybe they're quite normal certain parent preference kind of thing, and I thought, oh, do they prefer my wife, or are they asking for my wife because I don't share genetics with them, for example? And I know it's an irrational kind of thought to have, and I try, over the years I've rationalized those thoughts, but you still have them. I think that's quite normal, really. So yeah, it's complicated. I think would probably be, that's the long answer, but the short answer is complicated.
I think it's an honest answer, and I think it's a normal answer, right? Because people go through postpartum. People, go through all kinds of things when they first deliver. And so, they don't always bond, happen. But what you said is so true, right? Because even now it kind of comes back sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
And so it's something that doesn't go away.
Yeah. And I would say, like, sort of going back to like the donor sibling topic, I think what can happen when the topic of donor siblings comes up, those fears all get kind of lumped into one again. So you might have, you're going along, you've got your little baby, everything's great, and you're talking to your child about the story. And then all of a sudden you might be in a Facebook group and the topic of donor siblings comes up and you're like, whoa, right, we're back again. Like, you go back to the whole worry again, like, well, how do I maybe talk to my children about that? If we connect with those families at a later date, or my children do when they're older, are they going to then feel less as me as the parent because they share genetics with those children, yet they don't share them with me? Like, there's so many things. And like I say, it's like a continual thing sometimes. And I think the donor sibling piece can kind of add sometimes to that situation of worry with parents, and obviously as our children get older as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. So the piece that is really the most important here is the parent and the parent's comfort level in being able to share the information. And well, let me rephrase that. Yes, share the information with the child, but accept the information for themselves.
Yeah, and that's if the information is available to them. I think you're probably safe to say, like, I've worked with parents that maybe don't know how many siblings, say we're talking about the sibling side of things, they don't know, for example, how many children have been born from the same donor as their children. So they don't know that figure and they don't know who they are. But if they've used say a sperm donor from a sperm bank that's had confirmed pregnancies, you know that there are going to be other families out there. So some parents sort of kind of worry about, well, I haven't really got any information to share with my children. But what you can do is bring up the concept that there are siblings potentially out there. So you're kind of introducing and drip feeding the story and introducing the idea and the concept of donor siblings without having to worry, like, you haven't got, because a lot of the practical, unless you do some of your own research and seek out your children's donor siblings and find out who they might be, a lot of the time you're not given that information, sadly. So yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is it doesn't really matter, and this is what I tend to think, but correct me if I'm wrong. It doesn't matter what the information is that you have. I mean, of course, it's great to have all information, but understanding the information that you have and what your next step could be and sharing that information is really helpful to the child. So whether you have the information from the bank of how many donors, how many times the person was to donate, which hopefully you have that information from the bank, or you don't have any information and everything was anonymous, knowing what you have allows you to share that information with the child and, understand it for yourself. and understand how you might help with curiosity about the next step in seeking information.
Yeah, and I think like you can share. I mean, this is from, I suppose, more of my lived experience and working with professionals in this area. But I think you can approach these conversations in an age appropriate way. I think people always worry, well, my children won't understand. A bit like the whole conception story discussions that we're now encouraged to have with our children from a really young age. You don't need to go into sex and relationships to explain how a baby's made, for example. With our children, you just need the very basics, that there was an egg and a sperm and a body to grow a baby in. At a very, very basic level, children can understand that. And I would say the same with donor siblings. The way that you can potentially bring that conversation in with your children from a very young age, again, once you've had those building block discussions about how a baby is made, you can maybe progress the conversation and say, well, there's a man that helped Mammy and Mama to make you, and that man helped other families to have a baby. And as you know, you need a sperm, an egg, and a body to grow a baby in. And that was the same for the other families. They used the same donor. And it can be a really, really basic conversation. You haven't really given any details. You've not given numbers. You've not given, where these families are or anything like that. It's just a really, really basic conversation. And yeah, your children aren't going to get it straight away, but over time, they will, and they will begin to understand it. And I've seen that with my own children. But I don't want to just say that it's easy conversations, because the flip side is those conversations can be uncomfortable. They can be challenging, and parents can fear them. And I get that as well. So that's why it's really important to have support in that.
Yes. So how do you find, and I know that you put together this wonderful course, how do you find that people can best find that comfort in being able to share the story? Because that would help with making it less awkward or less uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question, Laurie. And I think from my experience, listening to parents that have gone through the process can be really helpful. So listening to me, you might think, oh yeah, that's a really good way to bring that story to my family. But there will be people listening to this and think, oh no, I don't like using the word sperm, for example. So they might not use my way, but they might listen to another family who explain it in a slightly different way, and that really resonates with them. And I think that's okay too. So I would say listening to other people that have maybe gone before you can be very helpful. But I think also, and I suppose that, like, going back to the support, that's where like the community side can come in quite a benefit, because you're maybe with other parents that are either at a similar stage to you or a bit further ahead, so you can kind of lean into their experience. But the other side is just learning from the professionals as well. So things to do with like being aware of like childhood development and what our kids can and sort of can't understand at a certain age, and all of these things, like I say, we've discussed in this course. And to be fair, like, moving on, Laurie, and it's one of the, I love speaking to you about these subjects, is a lot of what I've sort of, I suppose, created and worked with professionals on has been born out of experiences I've had as a parent, as well as being a donor conceived person. And we was finding that more and more parents were like, I want to connect with siblings. I've maybe connected with siblings, my children's siblings, but I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to talk to my child. I don't know how to manage those connections. I don't know how to talk to my family about those connections, because that's another thing. Yeah, I don't, or maybe my partner and I disagree. So if you're partnered, your partner might not want to make those connections. So how do you deal with all that when you're on your own? So, this course, like I say, is Donor Siblings Connect with Confidence, is something that we set up for parents to kind of work through, just to kind of hold their hand through the process if it's something that they're considering, really, because there's not a lot of information out there really when it comes to this topic.
There's so little information, and people, that I work with, I find that depending on the child's age, somebody contacted me the other day, and she has a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old and soon to be another one, and she hasn't started to tell them that they're donor conceived, but wants to now. And so at different stages in life. And so, while you say, a sperm, an egg, and a body, I love that analogy. I usually say a sperm, body, and a sperm, egg, and uterus. But you would explain it to the 3 different ages, maybe in 3 different ways, right? maybe the younger one will have no interest. You'll be trying so hard to explain the story, and you take all your emotion to do this, and they want to go play in the corner with something, and that's okay. They could go play in the corner with something. You're getting your practice, you're telling the story. But then, I've heard so many different analogies of when people start to find out how many siblings they have and connecting with the siblings. And so, do you have any advice for the parents? Like, do you think it's good for the parents to connect first when they're younger, or do you think it's good to just, help your child find the path to connect with siblings?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a very developing area. I would say that. On a personal level, I feel there's many positives to come from connecting with your children's donor siblings. When your children are younger, one, I think it's helpful for information sharing. So for medical reasons, certainly if you've used a donor that's maybe anonymous or anonymous till 18, it's a long time to not have information. So if you're connected with other families, you can compare notes, if you like, between medical issues, developmental milestones, all those kinds of things. And I've heard so many examples where that's been really, really helpful. I've also aware of lots of positives to come from donor conceived people that have known their siblings from a younger age and have then been able to make some, connections and meaningful relationships with them. And there's quite a lot of research actually into this. So it's not just me talking about this or other donor conceived people. There's lots of research that's been done into this area. Wendy Kramer from the donor sibling registry has done a lot of work in this area, and she's got a great on her website. There's a whole resource bank on there of previous research that's looked at the positives, but also the challenges, I would say, of connecting with siblings and sibling families. Rosanna Hertz is another one. Random Families has written an amazing book around case studies of donor siblings. So there's lots of, I feel there's lots of positives to come, but I do also want to acknowledge there's lots of complexities that come with connecting with siblings as well. Certainly if you find yourself maybe in a larger sibling group, so if you found yourself that maybe your child is part of a large group of other families of 30, 40, 50 plus families, which sadly obviously does happen. We'd like it to be reduced. So if there's any sperm banks listening to this, it's important to bring numbers down. But in the interim, there are going to be lots of donor conceived people that are born into very large sibling groups. So there's lots of complexities that come with it as well. And like, how do you explain that to your children? So, but I think overall, for me, as a parent and as a donor conceived person that's been able to connect with my own siblings now as an adult, and found it quite odd because we've connected in our 40s and we're grown people with our own baggage and things like that. I would have liked to personally have known them a lot younger than I was able to. So yeah, I do think that the positives with connection sort of outweigh the challenges.
You just raised so many things, like my mind is going in 5 different But let me start from the beginning, if that's okay. But if you find that you have a child who is born with like 50 other families, that is called family limits and family unit size. And I would encourage everyone who is involved with this to look at the laws and look at the legislation in your area. Pay attention to it, because that's a voluminous number and it's not necessary. And it doesn't follow ASRM guidelines in the United States, which is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So I would encourage people to just pay attention to that. And it's a question to ask when you go to a sperm bank or an egg bank: how many times has the donor, donated, so that you feel like you have some kind of control or limit. There's no real overall arching way to measure that, but at least ask the question so that you can empower yourself with that.
Yeah.
That's, I think, very, very important. And I spoke about that a few years ago already at the first summit. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, it's escaping me. But and so we've been talking about this for a long time, and it's important. The other thing is, Hayley, it's interesting that you say you wish you had connected with them earlier than in your 40s. Do you consider them siblings, your siblings? Or do you
Yeah, it's a toughie because I was raised an only child. So the concept of having genetic siblings, half brothers, sisters, whatever you sort of like interchangeably call them, different things, completely blew my mind. It was just a very weird thing to think of, but also really quite an amazing experience, actually, because I've seen it as an addition, an expansive experience to kind of find who they are. And when I say just know them younger, I just think that just would have been it would have been helpful. But I didn't know I was donor conceived younger, so it's quite hard to kind of put myself in it as a younger person, if you know what I mean. But going back to your question, I wouldn't say I consider them my brothers and sisters, apart from the technical term of what that would mean. I don't have what I would consider a brother or sister relationship with any of them, but we are in contact. And for me, actually, I think more maybe because I've got to know them later in life, out of a curiosity thing, it's been really interesting. So we've got lots of differences, but there are similarities as well. So that's been helpful. But probably a side of my age is the medical side has been really, really helpful to me on an individual level. So I've had some medical complications with my health, and being able to ask them questions about certain conditions. Same with the donor. So my genetic father, if you like, I've been able to locate him too. So being able to find the missing pieces, if you like, from my medical history has been really, really beneficial to me. So I would say actually that's probably been the most helpful part. And that would have been helpful a number of years ago, if that makes sense, as opposed to in my 40s.
No, of course it does. It makes a lot of sense. So in order to become comfortable as the parent, we keep flipping back and forth issues like the donor conceived child and the donor conceived person, and then donor conceived parent, which is all one person. The question would be, how does the person go through, and I imagine you address this in the lectures that you give, because the professionals that you're using are so wonderful and I admire them. How do you go through the genetic grief? And what is genetic grief? It's the loss of using your own genetics and having your child, so that you can then become comfortable in telling your child about their conception. There's so much on the parent to become comfortable. And so my philosophy always is try and practice the conversation, try and write it down for yourself so that you can, write a little story, or, put together a song, or put together a scrapbook or something that helps you in processing what you're going through, so that when you are able to tell your child is able to understand what you mean by there's other people that have been helped to have a family by the same person. You then can help them and support with their curiosity, because supporting them in their curiosity only helps you in transparency and in your relationship with your child.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, you don't know, but that doesn't mean you can't try and figure it out. And there's so many different ways today.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say like with the genetic loss thing, it is a huge part of an experience for many people going through donor conception. Certainly if you've had many years of infertility, maybe you've tried with your own genetics first and it hasn't worked for whatever reason. And there's a lot of understandable emotions tied up in that. And I think what can happen sometimes, from what I've experienced working with parents in those circumstances, is that they've not really fully processed what it's meant to then move on from their own genetics to then using a donor. So, and it's often sold as a bit of a quick fix, sadly. People get moved on to donor treatment without really explaining that it's a completely alternative path. It's not, in many ways, it's not the same as having a child with your own genetics for lots of different reasons. There are different conversations you will have to have. Yes, the relationship will be, and I can confidently say this, your relationship will just be just as amazing with a child, whether you share genetics or not. But there are certain things you have to consider as a parent to donor conceived children. So, and that's why we're huge advocates, I suppose, with a lot of people I work with and the professionals, is just trying to help parents through that, trying to help them process some of the grief that they might still have. So again, that they can help best support their child when the time comes to have those really important conversations. Because what I know from my own experience is that from my parents, sadly, is that they never dealt with that infertility grief. They never dealt with the shame. They never dealt with the secrets. And sadly, even though I'm a grown woman and my parents, we do have a very good relationship and open, it's still, you can tell that it's still a topic that they really struggle with. And I think that's what we want to try and improve for the next generation of donor conceived people is that those issues are kind of, you know, with support, we're helping parents kind of really deal with those so that they can then best support their children.
It's wonderful, and you're doing so much work towards that, you know, and so that's really so significant. And so when it comes to having them connect, or having the parents connect for the donor conceived children, now you're kind of related in a way, right? When you donor conceived siblings, then the parents are connected in a very unusual way.
Yeah.
How do the parents navigate that relationship with donor siblings?
Yeah, and it can be really tricky. I think some parents maybe find siblings, their children's siblings, sorry, and obviously connect on essentially their behalf, really. And a lot of the time it's parents connecting with other parents because the children are maybe very young. And it's like, it can be quite a challenging thing, like, because essentially they're strangers most of the time across the internet. It's likely that some of those families might not share your same views or opinions or political views or whatever it may be. So all of these things can be quite tricky to kind of navigate. And one of the actual modules on my course, we specifically address how to navigate parents connecting with other parents, things that you may or may not share, how you make those decisions, how much you want to share and with whom. But yeah, there are all lots of things to think about. And I think sometimes, again, you don't know what you don't know. You kind of find yourself in this situation. Maybe you've been invited into a private Facebook group with a group of siblings, families that have used the same donor as you, but you're like, well, okay, what do I do now? Because it is, because there is no rule book, there is no guidebook really out there to kind of help you through that process. So what we've found is that parents kind of muddle along and do their best with little guidance. But yeah, I would just say, I mean, some tips really would be to just, you don't have to share anything you don't want to. And probably another important point is, if you're partnered, is to discuss with your partner about making those connections as well, because obviously you don't want, if you're at disagreement about the process, then that's probably not going to be a good thing. You want to try and come to some agreement there before then connecting with the other families, because it just adds another layer of complication. But there's so many different things, and like you say, as we're talking, like I'm mentioning something and there's something else, isn't there? Sparks another kind of challenge, if you like.
Right.
So many things to consider.
There's so many things to consider, and you mentioned the same thing twice just now, so I think it's worth talking about for a second. And you said if you want to connect and your partner doesn't, or vice versa, your partner wants to connect and you don't. This happens so often through a fertility journey.
Yeah.
So it happens when it comes to siblings, absolutely. And, you know, I could give you stories, and I'm sure you could give more than I can, about adults who find out that they're donor conceived, and their partner, when they're in their 30s or 40s, doesn't want any part of it, but they do. But now bring it down to the level of, you have donor conceived child. You've already done so much, if you have a partner, to get this information with your partner. You know, you've gone through all of the testing, you've gone through the search for the donor, you've made all of these decisions along the way. And so this is just another decision. So what you want to do is you want to use those same communication skills and those same compromising and understanding skills and listening skills. And if it's a challenge, then please, please, please seek support. Because on this topic specifically, it's going to impact your child. And so it's not just going to impact the two of you. And you want your child to see a united front, and you want your child to feel as if there's not a secret, and as if they're not doing anything wrong. Because that adds yet another whole layer, right? When you feel like you want to find out about who your siblings are, but you're afraid you're going to make your parents feel bad. So there's so much to keep in mind around these items. So when it comes to partners not agreeing, you know, I'm repeating myself, I know I am, but use your compromising skills, use your communication skills with each other, use your mirroring tools, you know. But if you're not working it out, then please seek support on that.
Yeah, definitely. And like someone like yourself, Laurie, would be really helpful in that situation, isn't it? Is someone that can be bit more impartial and can kind of help couples, if you're coupled, kind of navigate that process. Because there are lots of instances, like with anything in life, isn't it? You don't always agree with your partner if you're partnered. So yeah, but it is important because it is such a huge topic.
You know, it's
Yeah.
I'll share a quick story with you. I was working with a couple the other day, and they're having a baby, and they have a hard time compromising all the time. And I said, "Well, how did you decide on the name of the baby?" Right? Because that's usually a compromise. And they told me how they decided on using the name of the baby, and it really wasn't a challenge for them, which is unusual because they usually have challenges, but it was unusual, but they were able to pick the name without a challenge. And so, you know, if you can think about how you used your skills in the past, then please bring them forward onto this situation
Mm.
so that you can transfer them and just think, oh yeah, we know how to do that. We know how to have these conversations. We know how to work through this, and use it on something like, you know, how you decided on the name of the child.
Mm.
Because ultimately everybody decides on the baby's name.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be, like I say, quite a common thing, I think, because from my experience, there's normally one parent that tends to do a bit more of the research in and spends time in Facebook groups or whatever that might be. So may be a little bit more ahead in their thinking about the topic, whereas maybe the other partner didn't even really consider it maybe before their partner raised it. So it's like trying to get on a similar page, isn't it? You might not always be on the same page, but you want to try and get a bit close. And I think that's okay as well. And I think that's for the parent that maybe is a bit more keen to connect. Sometimes they need to slow down as well a little bit and maybe wait for the partner to catch up if they're going to, because sometimes it can be a little bit, I was probably in that boat, a bit more sort of let's do this, whereas, like, you know, sometimes you've got to accept that your partner might not be quite ready, and I think that's okay. And like you say, if you are struggling with that, it's probably best to, like I say, leave it to the professionals and speak to someone like yourself, Laurie, on that one.
Or look at the course, you know, but seek help, seek
Yeah.
information. Information's key, education is key in so many of these things. And so, Hayley, is there anything else you think that we should talk about or cover in terms of what would be helpful for people to know? Some key takeaways?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, we've covered quite a few topics, I suppose, but I mean, when we're looking specifically at donor siblings, I think that it's certainly a growing area. I think more and more families are looking to connect when their children are younger. But yeah, just not to, if you're worrying about it or spending a lot of time Googling or looking on groups and things, there is, like I say, some more tailored support out there, whether that's through the program that we've got on Paths to ParentHub or whether you speak to a professional. Yeah, don't suffer in silence, because this is a really complex issue and it's okay to ask for help or seek further support. And the other thing I would say is that there isn't a huge rush. I think some parents will jump into this topic very quickly. And I think sometimes it's helpful to put the brakes on a little bit, maybe educate yourselves a little bit more around the topic, speak to other parents that have maybe connected with siblings and kind of do a little bit of research, just so you're kind of straight in your mind, because I think sometimes parents jump straight into, say, the connection process, get thrown into maybe a private group with other families, and it can be very overwhelming. And then the temptation then is to kind of back away because you're not ready. So I think, yeah, just take your time, and there's no harm in that. There's no rush. So.
Well, that's great. Hayley, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And so I know we mentioned the course a couple times, but if people want to get a hold of you or they want to access the information, how would they do that?
Yep, certainly. So the course is called Donor Siblings Connect with Confidence. Like I say, it is a self-paced course. It's 12 modules. You can go through it at your leisure, but it's all pre-recorded content, whether like videos, or we've also got with Dr. Vital Perlman, like I say, who's a very good child psychologist here in the UK, but it is an international course. And you can work through the modules, and there's lots of supportive material there. And we've got chats with donor conceived people that have connected with their siblings and parents too, as well as researchers in the field that are quite knowledgeable in this area, giving an input on it. So if you go over to pathtoparenthub.com, which is our website on courses, and you'll find it there. And if you've got any questions, you can reach me either through Instagram. So if you're over on Instagram, my own account is DCP Journey to RP, which is a little bit of a complicated handle, but the other one is Paths to Parent Hub. which is a bit more straightforward. So you can find me there. And I welcome any questions, or if you've got any thoughts about this topic, then like I say, my inbox is always open. So yeah, that's pretty much it, really.
Well, thank you. I think that's a lot. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you. And anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me at lauriemetz.net.
Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not sure how to end it now because
It's all right. You can pause it, I think. Can you pause it?
I don't know where.
If you go on more. Yeah.